I am digging into the Buddha's treasure chest, a fantastic collection of teachings from the historical Buddha left behind in the Pali Canon, as also teachings from various monks, respected monks at the time that are also given status in the Pali Canon, and commentaries from later on. This body of work, the Pali Canon, is extraordinarily helpful in this time. And of course, things have changed, but what we have now is a capacity for communication with a large part of the world through this very medium of video. So I'm giving this talk in Canada, and I'm hoping it will be heard in various countries around the world, including Thailand. This talk is about compassion and the need for the development of the individual who radiates compassion and is interested in helping the world, and how the teachings of the Buddha can assist the general public and the world, even those who are not practicing Buddhism particularly. They also will respond to certain teachings because the teachings of the Buddha are about a great understanding of human psychology and the emotional center of humans, what is positive and what is negative for humans. So it's very, very valuable. I would like to start with a little story from the Buddhist suttas. This is a discourse the Buddha gave. It is about acrobats. So there are these acrobats who make a living by performing. And one of them is the master, and the other one is the student. And the master says to the student, "You should climb up on this bamboo pole. I will hold it on my shoulders. You climb up there and balance on that bamboo pole. I will stay down here, and I will look after your welfare up there, your balance up there, and you look after my balance down here." So this student does climb up there, but she says, "I instead will look after my balance, and you look after your balance. And we will get down safely. Everybody will applaud, and we will earn money, and we will go on our way." So the Buddha comments on this. Should we be looking after our own balance? Or should we be looking after another's balance? Or should we be looking after both our own balance and the other's balance? So he says that both are correct. The student is correct. One must look after one's own balance. Now, what is it to look after one's own balance? The Buddha summarizes it by the practice of mindfulness, especially the four foundations of mindfulness, is to look after one's own balance. But the master says that he will look after her balance and she should look after his balance. Is he wrong? No, he's right as well. How do we look after another's balance? Well, also by practicing mindfulness, we are looking after another's balance. We can look after another's balance because we have resources to be able to do that. But what else does it involve? How do we, when we look after another's balance through our mindfulness, what are we doing? What are we practicing? We're practicing loving kindness and compassion and sympathy, and of course generosity and patience, especially patience. Often we find in relationship to others that one of the key ingredients is not to be impatient with them. Not everybody understands right away, and so we have to wait and offer what we can in order to assist them. Not everybody is willing to accept our advice or our help. They don't understand it as beneficial to them. During that period, we have to practice patience. And patience is a high virtue. Of course, one of the things the Buddha says in another sutta is that patience is the highest virtue. Much of life involves being patient, and great suffering occurs when a person is impatient. And if you want to engage in social action and benefit for the world, you're going to have to be a very patient person. And one of the attitudes the Buddha teaches us is that although we engage in acts of kindness, of generosity, of offering the teachings, of offering skills and education to others, we may not succeed. It is not destined to success. This is an important teaching for people who are involved in the social services, in medicine, in mental health services, in political organizations, etc. They often have this notion that they will succeed. And quite often in attempting to reform society around us, we have an expectation that we shall succeed. But the Buddha is pointing out that the roots of the problems in society are very, very deep. They are rooted in individuals. So we have a society, and that society is just composed of a large group of individuals. And at the roots of most individuals is ignorance, a lack of knowledge about the skillful ways of living, skillful ways of thinking, of speaking, and of acting. And if we don't understand how deep these roots grow, then we will have false expectations. So many a social worker, many ecologists, many people wanting to do good work burn out because they expect to succeed, and then they're met with failure. So this is the thing why we're cultivating this mindfulness ourselves. The practice of meditation and the cultivation of the mind, which we would say in Pali is bhavana, the growing of the garden of the mind, is a very effortful process. We have in the path, before we get to mindfulness, we have something called right effort. And the effort is to remove the negative types of emotions that are in our minds, attitudes and emotions that are in our minds. In brief, the 5 hindrances of greed and anger, agitation, sloth, and wavering doubt, paralytic doubt, problematic doubt. These are the 5 hindrances. The Buddha says these must go. You must weed them out within yourself. And they are not to be treated as normal or something that is can't be removed. And you'll find in many cultures, and including certain psychology teachings and sociology teachings, that people normalize these emotions, these negative emotions of greed and hostility, of agitation and sloth and paralytic doubt, and all of the other emotions that go along with this, anxiety, depression, paranoia, fear, etc. They often treat these as normal, as part of life, and not something that you are going to get rid of, but perhaps just manage. The Buddha is strongly advocating that you can go a long ways toward ridding yourself of these things, and you should aspire to this. And to at least, if not accomplishing it in this life, know that it could be accomplished, and that some people have managed to alleviate this completely from their heart and their mind. And the positive things which are going to arise when you practice your mindfulness, remember that right effort comes before right mindfulness, and this can be easily forgotten. When the Buddha, in this little parable, this little story about the balancing pole acrobats, speaks of mindfulness as watching your own balance and mindfulness as beneficiary to others, he also, of course, includes right effort in the mindfulness. The mindfulness must be of the right type. It's not enough to pay attention, and of course, one of the most popular teachings of the Buddha that has spread throughout the world, made a great impact in the West, in all of the Western world. In all fields of sociology and psychology, you will find courses in mindfulness. You will find mindfulness has been brought into hospitals, it has been brought into prisons, it has been brought into classrooms, early education, into universities. It is a great help. But if we don't understand that it's not merely paying attention, but a kind of attention which has a theme to it, and the theme of this attention is to remove the negative emotions of greed and anger, agitation, sloth, and doubt from the mind in a very deliberate way, in a systematic way, and to replace that with some very positive things, and which will occur quite naturally. The 5 hindrances are self-harassments. We harass ourselves. We continuously put sand into the machinery, the smooth machinery of the heart and the mind, and it's very irritating. Such emotions as greed and hatred, agitation, sloth, heaviness, depression, worry, and doubt. These are all irritants to the mind. If we stop doing that, and many people don't understand that they're allowed to stop doing that, that you can actually stop doing that, the mind will rejoice. And what will naturally arise are movements towards the enlightenment factors. What are the enlightenment factors? They are mindfulness itself is an enlightenment factor. A wise understanding of the nature of life and reality, that is, the flowing, changing, unstable nature of life, that things come and go, sometimes positive, sometimes negative. When we investigate this wisely, we learn to have an attitude towards it which doesn't reduce our balance in life, that we stay balanced. So this is why this parable of the acrobat is that we are keeping our balance when we cooperate with each other. So it requires both the student who climbs up on the bamboo pole to keep their balance, and it requires that the person holding up the pole keeps their balance, and that they both also keep an eye on each other in order to keep the balance. So this is a high level of awareness, both of one's how do you maintain balance in the midst of the successes and failures of life. Sometimes you're praised, sometimes you're blamed, sometimes you're well known, sometimes nobody knows you, sometimes you have good fortune and sometimes bad fortune, sometimes good health, sometimes bad health. Can you keep your balance in the midst of this? A small example of this relationship is a marriage. So a wife and husband have to practice like these balance acrobats. The wife can't just think of herself. The husband can't just think of themselves. They can't just think of the other person either. They have to think both of themselves and the other person. You can see relationships like this. So this is called the microcosm, the small unit of the world, the family. So you will see some people in a family where one person sacrifices themselves to the happiness of the rest of the family. Is this wise? Is this good? Is this to be praised? That, say, the wife sacrifices herself for the well-being of her children and her husband, and neglects herself? No, this is not good, because the wife will burn out. She will become depressed. She will be drained of energy. She will become physically ill. And then she will be of no use to the husband and the children. Should the husband sacrifice himself through work and hard effort and neglect his own health and well-being in order to please his wife and children? No, he should not, because he also will get sick. He will also decline in mental and emotional well-being. and then he will be of no use at all. So he must take care of himself, and he must take care of his family. The wife must take care of herself, and she must take care of her family. The children, when they're young, cannot take care of their parents. Although children, even at a very early age, you will see compassion manifesting in children. They will wish that their parents will be well. And they will, in fact, the parents should teach them that it's just not about them and the cookies that they like or the ice cream that they like. They should offer to share their cookies and ice cream with their parents as well. And that teaches them very early in life the delight of sharing and concern for others. If they grow up just having concern for themselves, they may be all right, but they won't have a full life. Until you have a sense of including the other in your life, others in your life, you cannot have the fullest expression of life. So even the Buddha, of course, his long journey in samsara is a cultivation of these virtues of compassion and generosity and kindness to others. But he does not neglect his own practice. He spends much time alone in solitude because it's beneficial to others. So one must not always be engaged with others. This is a major fault in modern society. So this is very important, and it has something that Buddhism is one of the last of the great religions to preserve. That is the value of solitary contemplation, to go alone and be with your own mind and to understand yourself. Because it's not by looking at others, talking to others, being with others that you understand others. It is by going alone and looking at your own mind, how it works, that you begin to understand how the mind works. And when you understand how the mind works and you have direct access to the mind through your own mind, you don't have direct access to mind through others' minds. You have direct sight of what goes on in your mind. And then it's universal. It's what goes on in other people's minds. So some of the people who have the best understanding of others are people who have spent a lot of time alone watching their own mind. People in professions like law, like judges, like social workers, like lawyers, like policemen, who deal with people all the time may not have as good a grasp of the nature of people as the person who has spent many years even by themselves, because you get access and understanding of the nature of the mind by what we call meditation or contemplative practices. So when we meditate and take care of ourselves, guard our own balance, we are preparing ourselves to have something to offer to the world. I want to give an example. In the West, at a certain period of time, when the Europeans arrived in North America, they founded a populated continent. In Canada and the US, there were native Indians. Now, when they first made contact, the Europeans were Christians, and they thought that the Indians had no valuable religious ideas at all, that they were uncivilized, and they didn't appreciate any of their capacities. As time went on, eventually they decided to bring the North American Aborigines, the Indians of North America, integrate into society. So they forced them, they took the children away from their parents and took them to churches and made them to church camps and schools and made them speak exclusively in usually the English language and to adopt the culture of the West. Now this disrupted the family. The children were alone, they were scared, they were traumatized by this. And who did this? Primarily the religious people, Catholics and Protestant people, thinking they were doing good. Why did they think they were doing good? It would be obvious to a really compassionate person that they weren't doing good. You don't steal people's children and take them away. They need their parents. You don't treat them roughly. So why did they do this? It is because in Christianity, the appreciation of meditation and contemplative practices fell away in the last 300 or 400 years. They turned more to activity in the world, social work, missionary work, and they forgot the value of prayer and contemplation. So they outreached with their hands. The hands were reaching out and attempting to reform the world, but they had lost the peace of the heart. So if Buddhism does this, they will also lose their wisdom. The hands will be very active, but the heart will be neglected. So that's what the Buddha is talking about in this balance. You must keep the contemplative practices, the meditation practices going, especially amongst the monastics, but also encourage lay people to take these practices up. And that is the heart. The human heart will be healthy, and it's the one that decides what the hands will do. The hands only outreach. The heart is where the message comes from. So in all aspects, so even in this environmental movements, Buddhism is one of the great environmental teachings. The Buddha taught harmlessness to animals, even the plants and the insects, harmlessness towards all human beings. And this is a very remarkable at that time in history. We still haven't caught up with it. The other philosophies and attitudes in the world are just catching up to this idea now that outside of the human practice and outside of your own personal community practice, you must have an attitude of non-harm to others as well. And that means that you must take care of the environment, because if you don't, if you neglect it, it will turn on people, on animals, etc., on life itself. So we have to practice restraint and non-greed and non-hostility. This is affecting the international political situation as well. You will see the wars that are breaking out, the Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Gaza, and so forth. One of the things, and these are primarily about territory, invading other people's territory, taking over each other's territory. Remember this teaching from the Buddha. He settled a situation of tribes attempting to take over each other's land because they wanted to control a river. And he said to them, and this stopped them in their tracks, he said, "Which is more valuable, water or blood?" And what we have to sober up and realize and give this message out, what are you doing? Is land and water more valuable than human blood? Human blood is more valuable. You have to compromise. You have to share. You have to not be greedy. You have not to be assertive. You have to relinquish sometimes. And this is the core teachings of the Buddha can be brought into modern life and deal with all of these things. We need to keep generosity. Amongst those nations that have plenty, they need to be a sense of generosity towards those who do not. Those who have little need to have more. Those who have much need to share, because it's a single world with all humans are worthy of happiness and a good life. And we need to cultivate this emotionally, not just force people to give things away, not force it, but to show them the value of the generosity. So this is the nature, and to please recall this little story and tell it to people, both for their personal family relationships, for their relationship with countries, and relationship with the world. We cannot neglect our own practice of insight and mindfulness, and that we give a gift to others by practicing this, and we must keep these practices up. We cannot remain healthy if we don't do things for others through sympathy and love, but we also must take care of ourselves in order to maintain the balance. And we will keep opening the treasure chest of the Buddha's teachings, the Pali Canon to again and again refresh ourselves and come up with more insights from the Buddha.